guest speaker to be part of the 2021 Teacher of the Year selection committee again this year. We all know that Washington teachers are terrific, but I got a chance to meet some of the most amazing ones. And it's been one of the highlights of my term. When I heard our next guest speaker speak to our judging panel, I was really struck by her enthusiasm for inclusion and advocacy and family and community engagement. She creates an environment where students not only feel good about themselves, but they work to provide that lift to each other. And that positivity is so important for our students today. I'm really thrilled to introduce Brooke Brown, Washington's 2021 Teacher of the Year.
Oh, I was muted. Good afternoon, everyone. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I hope everyone's doing well today. Let me just get everything. So just like we were talking about earlier, I am definitely presenting from home. So if there's any interruptions, we'll just say hello. Can you see my screen with Sonia Renee Taylor? Thumbs up. Okay, excellent. All right. So just thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I just wanted to share a little bit about sort of my perspective and sort of the work that collectively we're all working to do together. So I like to start off with this quote by Sonia Renee Taylor. She says, "We will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal other than we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature." And so before we really get started today, I just want to just extend my heartfelt thank you to every one of you that supports our educators, that supports our young people, that just does all of this work every year, but especially in this really challenging year, this challenging sort of 14 or 15 months that have just been really hard. It's been hard for students, it's been hard for adults, and y'all just keep showing up and so being really supportive. So I just wanted to say thank you before we even get started. So a little bit about myself. So I was born in Seattle. I identify as a biracial Black woman. I use she, her, and hers pronouns. I love to read. And I love ice cream and pizza, but it doesn't love me. So I'm dairy free. Just adjusting to that. So I became an educator. I've been in the classroom for 15 years. And so much of what I do as an educator is to try to be who I needed as a young person. So this is a picture of me in preschool. It was Heritage Day. And you can look around and you can sort of see, okay, some folks had access to sort of their culture, their ethnicity, and some folks didn't. So much of my identity, when I'm asked, when I shared I identify as a biracial Black woman, but so much of my identity had to do with absence. I've never met my dad. He passed away a couple years ago. And so the relationships that I did have that helped me to really discover who I am came from my brother and sister. And so really thinking about how are we helping our young people cultivate their identities? How are we going through that same process ourselves? One of the, our Dean of Students was sharing in my class, we were preparing to write critical family history projects. And, you know, he said there's no country called white or Black. So how are we accessing our culture? How are we learning about where our families come from? Because they all come from somewhere. And so when we celebrate culture and identity in class, for some of us, it's about celebrating what we already know. For others, it's about reclaiming. It's this process of learning and growing and really learning how to love ourselves. These are my children and my husband. So I bring them into every space when I'm doing work, when I'm advocating. It's always on behalf of my own family. And it's also always on behalf of my students. So this is a picture of one of the days we were doing we had some guest speakers that were coming to speak in preparation for our critical family history. And Erin Jones was in the house that day. She was my mentor. She's been my mentor since I was in middle school. And she's someone that is a really big part of my life even today. the wrong way. And then I also want to make sure that everything that my students learn in class, we're also applying. So this is us at the Northwest Teaching for Social Justice Conference, where they are learning about the role of civic action, where they're learning what we talk about in class is what is learned here stays here, right? Or what is discussed here stays here. So we're learning about confidentiality and building trust, but what is learned here has to leave here. So how are we working to really develop that critical lens, but also to support one another? So people keep asking why I became a teacher, and it's really because I couldn't be the pink Power Ranger. But no, it's really because I learned about, I really wanted to strive for equality and for equity. I really wanted to help students have every opportunity possible. I wanted to help sort of remove those barriers. And so I learned about myself that I am a bridge builder. Maybe part of it is my identity as being biracial, or maybe part of it is just how I've grown up, but I see myself as a bridge builder. And part of what I think is really important is every single one of us have a really important role to play within the social justice ecosystem, the social change ecosystem. How are we impacting change? How are we utilizing each of our individual gifts, our unique gifts, to continue to make the space around us better? And so really thinking about how we all work within that ecosystem together. And then I really realized that it's actually more about justice and liberation. So it's actually more about really removing those barriers for opportunity. And I've really learned that relationships are the foundation to everything that we do. And so in my classroom, it's about cultivating. Sonia Renee Taylor has a beautiful book called Your Body is Not an Apology, sorry. Your Body is Not an Apology. It's a book on radical self-love. So I want my students to, yes, be better readers and writers when they leave, but more importantly, I want them to really cultivate this deep love of who they are, to be able to look in the mirror and be proud of what looks back at them. I want them to really understand how we got to today. And I want them to really be able to take action, to have concrete steps to make the space around them better. So what does it look like to really care about things that don't directly impact you? Those are muscles that I'm trying to build in my students, and that we can collectively build in our young people and each other. And it's all about love. And it's really this idea that community is a verb. So I think about parenting, and I think about this work with young people a lot. Right?
Hi, Brooke, you seem to be back. We can see you again. Oh, she's frozen again, folks.
All right, I lost you for a second.
You did lose us for a few seconds, Brooke, probably about a minute or so.
Okay. All right, that was so weird. My computer just like exited out. Okay, can you hear me now and see my screen again?
Yes, it looks great. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. All right. So in some things that I do to build community in my classroom as we recite in Lakesh together, really building this these muscles in our students that we are connected, that we are either going to be successful or not successful based on how well we work together. All right, so in my classroom, I focus on being culturally responsive, culturally sustaining, community responsive, humanizing, and anti-racist. It's not just the what that I'm teaching, but the how. And we focus on building learning communities where we sort of decenter power, where we are collectively sharing, where we're looking at power with a center on healing. We're looking at developing counter narratives, using critical pedagogy, and implementing praxis. So praxis is really learning about the theory, but then implementing it. So 2020 has been a year that has been full of grief, but it's also been a year of gratitude. So in the midst of so much heartache, so much pain, so much loss, how can we start to center gratitude? How can we really utilize joy as resistance? And so thinking about joy is so much deeper than happiness. It's not dependent on circumstances. So what can we do in our individual lives to center joy? How can we help educators and those around us center joy? And then really, how can we help students center joy? So even in the midst of difficult circumstances, how can we really focus on centering joy? And so I've been doing a lot of work with OSPI this year, really sort of after the book study. So what happens really after we do book studies? I know there's been a lot of different groups, a lot of different books that folks have been reading. And so I wanted to focus and sort of give us some questions to think about when we really think about what does it look like to really center our students and families as we do this really beautiful work as the PTA. And so how are we building community? And so I would just offer this foundation of wellness. So this is Jeff Duncan Andrade, and he talks about how wellness is the harmonizing of mind, body, emotion, and spirit. It is cultivated and sustained through healthy relationships that are responsive to the lived experiences and the historical and material conditions that shape them. Community responsive wellness, though, is really what I want us to strive for. It's this idea that it strengthens the sacred link between my development and the community's development. So it's the idea that if I am well, but one of my neighbors is sick, then collectively we're unwell. And so really helping students to really understand that even if things don't directly impact them, how can I care enough to show up and support other folks? How can I care enough to take action to help make other people's lives better, even if it doesn't directly impact me? So when we think about how do we develop that strong inner self, that strong interpersonal self, that's the relationship between folks, and then the interconnectedness, that positive interrelatedness to ancestors, to place, to land, really to the natural world, because the goal is that we're going to grow ecosystems where people and communities experience place, power, purpose, awareness, resilience, empathy, hope, love, and joy. So that's the goal, right? That's what we want to see for all of our children, for all of our educators, for all of you, as we're building these beautiful communities. So what are some ways that we can start to think about? And so one of the ways that I think is really good to think about really digging into that work with communities is to think about, do we know the harm in the community? What is hurting the communities that we work in? Do we know the hope of the community? What are communities that we work in, what they hope for? And do we know the heart? Who's doing the work already? And how can we really build those beautiful partnerships together? So some ways that I think about this is what is your positionality in the community? Do you live there? Do you just work there? So how are you really building those authentic relationships that require time and intentionality? Remember, community is a verb. So how are we consistently watering that relationship? Are you a member or an outsider, and how does that impact your work? What's the demographic of your current community? Has it changed over time? And how have we really learned what our community needs, what our community wants? How are we intentionally including families in the process of building partnerships, not just as targets for intervention? How are we really thinking about engagement and partnership? So families get to decide what that looks like. So what do they actually have the capacity, or do they want to engage in? How are we really making sure that we're getting to what our communities really need, and not to just sort of the program that we just do year after year? How are we digging in to say, what do they need this year? And it might be different from what they needed last year. How are we really saying, what power am I willing to relinquish to give to folks in my community? What ownership am I willing to give up to allow families and community members to take that leadership? And how are you committed to the process and not the product? And the last thing is really, how are we shifting to the needs of our families and communities and not asking them to shift to what we think they need? So often in my classroom, it becomes, we really have to be careful not to think that we know best for what folks in our community need. How can we make sure that the definition of success is theirs and not ours? And how are we really doing everything we can to prioritize what our families, what our communities, what our schools need instead of what we think they need? And so some of the ways that we've started to look at it is, how can we move from sort of we know what's best to unlocking that collective community capacity? How can we really move from outside and inside organizing to really building the leadership and power of students, parents, and other community members to define their priorities and make those necessary changes? And how are we building the accountability to make sure that's what happens? So a lot of times I see folks, we're having conversations and we're asking, but then are we really implementing what folks are asking us to do? So really thinking about how are we utilizing the protective factors that are in each of the families to really support them to build what they need. And so the last thing that I'll focus on a little bit is, how can we really do this work? What does it really look like? And so really thinking about, how are we attending to the impact that we have instead of just the intent? How are we making sure that we're leaning into what's uncomfortable? This is challenging work. Y'all are doing an amazing job. And how can we continue to really serve our students and families the way they need to be served? How can we really lean into the process and really understand that the process is what's important, not the outcome, not the product? I thought this was so beautiful to think about. Y'all don't have to have all the answers. That's what I tell educators and my students, like, you don't have to know all the answers. And that's so liberating. And it's so beautiful to say, like, I don't know, but let's find out who does. And then really think about, how can we really learn together? How can we center each other's humanity and have humility while we do it? The most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. Alice Walker says that. And I think it's really about, how can we really make sure that we are utilizing the power that we have to support others to find their power. I was on a panel recently with some students that talked about what makes a powerful educator. And this young person said, we need folks that can understand who they are. And I know this, we're talking about educators, but I think just anyone involved in supporting young people. We need folks that understand themselves, that understand young people. When they're talking about education, that overstand the curriculum, or I'll say the content of whatever we're working on. Overstand. I was like, who is this kid? He's amazing. And then he said, we need people that understand what their gift is so they can help us learn ours or find ours. I was like, yes. We are not there with a specific agenda to just make something happen. We are there to impact the legacy of young people. When I look around my classroom, I don't see just, I teach 12th grade, so I don't see just a group of 12th graders. I see their grandkids. I see every interaction that I have as an opportunity to support their grandkids on their role, on their journey. It's about building legacies. It's about helping students become their first and making sure that we move way past that of firsts, that they're the first of many in their line of family. And it's really about solidarity. How do we link arms together and show up for one another to make the space around us better? And so that is done through accountability. And accountability can sometimes feel like an attack when we're not ready to acknowledge how our behavior harms others. And so this is a really, Brene Brown talks about how the opposite of courage is not fear, but it's armor. So how can we actively work to pull down that armor, to have real conversations, to be in real relationship with folks around us? And you know what? We're going to make mistakes. We're going to make people frustrated sometimes. It's sort of like when you're in a friendship and you have a best friend and you're like, yeah, we're besties. And then you get in a fight. And then it's like, okay, can we move past this? That's the relationships that we need to build to get this work really get this work done. How can we have real, authentic relationships with one another and with the families and the communities that we serve? And so one of the things that I saw recently is it's called the anatomy of an apology. But I was thinking about, like, what does it really mean to bear witness when we've done something that maybe has hurt someone's feelings and we didn't realize it? What does it mean to really understand that I can attend to how that other person feels, even if it wasn't what I meant? How do I create space for folks around me to feel how they feel without any shame or guilt? How can I understand that it's not about the way I feel, it's about the way other folks feel that I'm working with? How can I take ownership to maybe what I did unintentionally? And then how can I invest in the labor of reconciliation? We need every single one of you as we continue this difficult work to really change the landscape and to change the opportunities for all of our students. And so the last thing that I'll leave you with is this, I love quotes, and I saw this quote, and it says, kindness matters, but kindness doesn't equal justice. Civility counts, but civility is not the humane response to injustice. Justice is. Love is essential, but love is not a passive weeping bystander. Love puts in work. And so this last quote from the amazing Bettina Love, she says, too often we think the work of fighting oppression is just intellectual. The real work is personal, it's emotional, it's spiritual, and it's communal. It is explicit with a deep and intense understanding that loving Blackness is an act of political resistance. And so really, we need one another. Y'all already have this beautiful community that you're working together with. And so I'm just so appreciative of all the work that you're doing on behalf of each and every one of our young people and in solidarity and community with one another. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke. You know, you were inspiring the first time that I got to hear you, and everyone else on the panel agreed. Everybody was just blown away by you, and I am appreciative of what you're able to give our kids today, because I think they need that positivity and they need that ability to lift each other up and be more aware in the world. So thank you very much. And I'm really happy that you were able to join with us today, and good luck on the rest of your Teacher of the Year experience.
Thank you so much for having me. And again, thank you all for all the beautiful work you do for our young people and for one another.
Yeah, thank you.